Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're starting a study in the book of Daniel. So today's video will be chapter 1 and I'm going to make a playlist for everybody just to go chapter by chapter in the book of Daniel. Daniel is one of my favorite books in the Bible because it's just an example of trusting God no matter what the circumstance is, no matter what storm that you're going through. And as we'll see going into the book, Daniel is a perfect example of someone who just puts all of their faith and all of their trust in God. So let's get into it. Quick overview, Daniel is the 27th book in the Old Testament, and it is written by the prophet Daniel around the timeline of about 530 BC. Daniel was a high-ranking government official, but before that, I have in my notes, he was actually described as a young man who stuck to his principles against all the challenges that he faced with really cruel pagan rulers. Daniel also had the gift of interpreting dreams, and with this gift, he gave all of his glory to God. And like I said earlier, this book just really helps us to remain faithful to God no matter what the circumstance is. And it allows us to see that even the most difficult times, he is always faithful to us. So a huge theme that stood out to me in this book as I was going through the 12 chapters is trust. So that word just popped into my head over and over again as I was reading this. So I wanted to put up the definition of the word trust. So it says, reliance on the integrity, strength, ability, surety of a person or thing, confidence. And then another explanation of it is just confident expectation of something, hope. So I wanted to share this definition because those are really powerful words. And I think that it just kind of goes back to putting all of our trust in Him. Okay, so let's break this down. So chapter 1, verse 1 says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it or attacked it. So a good thing to note here is that Nebuchadnezzar took over Jerusalem, which was a city in Judah, as king. So the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar. And the word Shinar is just an ancient term for Babylonia. So to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. God is allowing this to happen. God is letting Nebuchadnezzar take over this whole thing in order to use it for his glory and purpose. So Nebuchadnezzar then takes these precious articles and treasures and valuables, and then he brings them back to Babylonia, to the house of his God. And in verse 3 it goes on and it says, then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs. And I just wanted to say the definition of the word eunuch as fitting in this. A castrated man in charge of a harem or employed as a chamberlain in a palace, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. So Nebuchadnezzar wanted the best of the best coming over to Babylonia, to his empire, to his nation, to help run it. And if you notice the words young men, so this stood out to me because from what we understand of it, they were probably between the ages of 15 to 20. So I like to think of this time period, it says later in verse 5, it says, and the king appointed them for a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them. So if we think about it, this makes me think of going to college. So they're spending 3 years. So just think of us leaving our home for 3 years, training. So these young men are actually taken from their families and they're brought to Babylonia to study and to eat the food of the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. So changing their names was part of Babylonian culture and getting them assimilated to Babylonian culture. The name Daniel in Hebrew means God is my judge. So Babylonians did not want that. They wanted to almost control them, of taking them and getting them to Babylonia. And remember, in Babylonia, they had all these different gods that they prayed to. They wanted them to forget the original names that their fathers had given them. Verse 8, it says, "But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with which the wine he drank." So defile is just another word for pollute. So Daniel is very, very used to his roots. He knows the God he serves, and he didn't eat like that. Therefore, he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So a good word, and I believe it might be the word of the NIV translation, is the word chose. So Daniel chooses not to defile himself. He sees everything that's going on around him, but he chooses not to. So I like that word, chose. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. So this is a great parallel to Genesis 39 verse 4, where Potiphar shows favor to Joseph. So in both scenarios, you have these pretty powerful men against somebody who they probably look at like nothing. The guard has no ties to Daniel. He should be saying, hey, do what you're told. But he does show favor to him. And it goes on and it says, "And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should I see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king." So he's saying, listen, man, like I understand, but the king would have my head. So Daniel says to the steward or the guard, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants." So Daniel's pretty brave to do this. When you think about it, he's just coming over. He knows no one but his 3 friends. He should probably be obeying the rules of the king, but instead he's saying, nope, I need to do this. So the guard consented or agreed with them in this matter, and he tested them for 10 days. Verse 15, "And at the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables." God was surely on their side there. Verse 17, "And as for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams." Because Daniel and his 3 friends trusted God, God remained faithful to them. So we see here God's faithfulness through this, that all they were doing was trusting God, and God delivers here. Now at the end of the days, so at the end of the 3 years, when the king had said they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in his realm. So, wow. So the magicians, astrologers, sorcerers, enchanters, during this time, they were considered the wisest of the wise men. So for the king to be saying that these 4 men are 10 times what the sorcerers are, that is incredible. So clearly Nebuchadnezzar is titling them as this, but in chapter 2 we will deep dive more into that.